from a pasuk. You see from the Gemara that a pasuk, the Torah, is a bigger raya to the Metzias than the Metzias is. Isn't that? I consider an unbelievable.
No, there were no maps. There were no maps. I have a raya that Rashi never saw a map of the Middle East.
There's a Rashi that discusses. There's a Rashi that discusses that. Yeah, but everybody knows that Bavel is north. When the Gemara is discussing if Bavel's north, it's long after Bavel came from the north to attack Eretz Yisrael. So by that time, it should have been common knowledge. Rashi didn't know. I think it was the position of the different rivers there. There's a Mefurish Rashi that anybody writes. I don't know the area. This is what I'm gathering from how I understand the Gemara. Okay, Givalti. Okay, let's see the Gemara. Machikin es hamishra min hayerk. Actually, this sugya was last week's plot, but I mistakenly told Mintzberg last week that the blot was a blot ahead. So he learned I think Taf Chafei instead of Chavdal. I think that's what it was last week. No. Okay, that's good. So it was a week ago. It was Yitches instead of. I told him Yitches instead of Yitches by mistake. I told him the wrong one. Turned out that Shabbos' blot was a difficult blot, so I'm happy I told him the wrong blot because he probably would have never said cheer for me again if I would have made him say such a fair blot. It's a massively long maram that goes through the sheet of Rabbi Yosy, the sheet of the Chachamim, and he writes, it's normally not my custom to elaborate so much, but since Rashi is Sosum, and you could only understand Rashi if you go through the Tosafos, and the Tosafos themselves are out of order, I just started to get involved. And then that's what he writes at the end. And then at the beginning of his shtickle, and at the end of his shtickle, he says, I'm sorry that I was Myrich, but it was the only way to convey the information. Now remember, I was working hard to try to figure out the Maram. There's a lot of detail, but we'll just learn the basics today. The Mishnah said that Mishra, when you're soaking Pishton, it's harmful to Yerek growing nearby. We learned that if you're planting cress somehow is harmful to onions growing nearby, and mustard is harmful to bees living nearby. And Rashi told us on the Mishnah that the bees are going to taste, no, it's not on the Mishnah, last week's Gemara. The bees will taste the chayil. It's like if you eat something very spicy, very hot, right away you need a drink. What is a drink available to a bee? Their own honey. So the bees are going to deplete their own honey. So the beekeeper is complaining, you're keeping chayil, which is causing my bees to eat their own honey. I'm not going to have the honey to sell. The Tana Rabbi Yosy mater b'chayil. Even though in all cases, we force the mazik to move away, we force the mishra to move away, and we force the crest to move away, and we force, even in those two cases we force, but by chayil we don't force. Because the mazik, or the apparent mazik here, meaning the owner of the chayil, can turn it around on its head and can say, before you tell me to take my chayil away from your bees, I can tell you, you're damaging my mustard seed. So maybe you're the mazik. So who said I should be the one to have to be responsible to move? Maybe you should be the one. Now, we learned over there that if you hold alamazik lahachik atzmai, you got to stay away. And who has to bear the expense of moving? The person who owned the mishra, the person who owned the cress, or maybe the person who owned the chayil. However, we also learned by a tree, which we're going to learn again in a moment in the Mishnah, if I cut down my tree, even though it was my fault, you have to pay me for my tree. What's the difference? So the Gemara over there explained, or Tosfos over there explains, that a tree is a much bigger loss than the loss of merely moving a mishra. So by a great loss, even though it's all on mazik, will make it a little bit easier on the mazik. The end of the Gemara last week that we learned said that Rabbi Yosy holds al nizik lahachakazatzmai. That's Rabbi Yosy shita, right? Al nizik lahachakazatzmai. And the Gemara said, really, Rabbi Yosy not only argues by chardal, but he argues by all of the things. Al nizik lahachakazatzmai. But he said, l'didi, on all the things, al nizik lahachakazatzmai. But l'didoch, even according to Yuchachov, at least agree with me by chardal, because by chardal I could turn it around and say, who said me as the bala chardal is the mazik? Maybe you as the bala devarim is the mazik. And the Rabban said no. Remember the Rabban said, I don't believe that they're going to eat the damage the chardal, because what are they going to damage? Because Rabbi Yossi doesn't say exactly what these leglugle are, so Tosha speculates on it. But I'll call upon him since he didn't specify what it was. It either means the leaves which will grow back, or it means the seed, which according to the Rabbanan, the bee can't get to anyway, right? So therefore, I don't see a way where the bee is going to damage the chayil. But Tosfos on the top of the base there says that Kubi eats the flower. Tosfos asks, why don't we say they're damaging the flower? Tosfos says that's not either a concern, because it only flowers for a very short period of time. It's unlikely in that short period of time the bees are going to damage the flower. So Sosum Rabbi Yossi never identified with clarity in what way precisely the bees are going to damage the chayil. Okay, that takes us to the Mishnah. Again, these are Mishnahs that we've chewed through so many times already in our exploration of the parak. They should go very smooth today. Marchikin is ilon minabar esrim v'chaveshama uvecharuv uveshikma, which are much bigger trees and therefore have much more penetrating roots. Chamisha mama. Ben milamayla, doesn't make a difference if we're talking about a hillside and the tree is above the level of the bar. Ben minatzad, or even if it's on the same level as the bar. Ima bar kadma, if the bar was there first, then koitzetz, you cut the tree down, v'noish and damer. But nevertheless, like we said a moment ago, the owner of the tree will receive compensation. V'm ilan kadam lo yikut. If the tree was there, I have a right to stop you from cutting it down. If you remember, we learned by a city, even if the Elam was kadam, you still cut it down. The difference between if the Elam was kadam or not is whether or not he receives compensation. Because we said that since if the city was first and you wrongfully built a tree, there you have to cut it down, and the city does not have to compensate you. The Gemara still Maskana is because one's hezek to Rabbim, one's hezek to Yachid, right? Sofik zeh kadam, sofik zeh kadam. What if we don't know what came first? Well, you don't cut it. But by a case of the city, you do cut it. Because in the city, it doesn't make a difference which one came first. Regardless, you'd have to cut it. But the Gemara says, when it comes to a Yachid, if my tree came first, I wouldn't have to cut it. So if it's a suffix, you can't make me cut it because you need to prove that my tree came after your bar. Yosy Omer, this is the flagship case of Rabbi Yosy, who holds al nizik laharcha kazatzmai afal pisha bar kodamas leilon lo yikot. I'm minding my own business, you mind your own business. And now that we read this Mishnah inside, it clearly says Rabbi Yosy argues on our Mishnah. It's a little bit more clear what the Gemara meant by a couple of Mishnahs ago, when the Gemara said Lema Tana the like Rabbi Yosy. So Rashi asks, of course, the Tana is not like Rabbi Yosy, because you see Rabbi Yosy argues on these Mishnahs. So the Gemara says, no, maybe this particular Mishnah in this same parak, maybe Rabbi Yosy would agree to it, and in fact, the Gemara said Rabbi Yosy would agree to it, because it was the sort of Giri delay. Remember the sort of Giri delay, which is what the Gemara is going to discuss right now. Tana, Bein Shabar Lamata, V'Ilan Lamayla, Bein Shabar Lamayla, V'Ilan Lamata. So this is a new case that the Mishnah doesn't discuss. Bar Lamayla, V'Ilan Lamata. How in the world are the roots of a tree that are well below the bar going to penetrate the bar? The roots of a tree will grow down and out, and it'll penetrate the bar and destroy the bar. Exactly how the roots won't be able to get. They don't go up the roots, so they won't get near the bar. I'm Rab Chago, I think it says. With the Gimel, right? B'Shem Rabbi Yosy, as the roots of a tree bore through the ground, it loosens up the ground. So the ground below the bar is going to get loosened up. So the floor of the bar might collapse. Rabbi Yosy Omer, Af al Bisha Bar Kaidames Le'ilan Lo Yikoitz Shezeh Chayv B'Soich Shaloi V'Zed Nateh B'Soich Shaloi. Amar Rabbi Domer Shmuel Halacha Rabbi Yosy Pas like Rabbi Yosy that al Nizik Lahar Chizat. Amar Rabashi Ki Avod Be'Rav Kahana Havar Minon Moidi Rabbi Yosy B'Giri Didei. Yes, al Nizik Lahar Chizat. But that's if the mazik is not directly being mazik the nizik. For instance, the flagship case of this is the textbook case of this is Rashi quotes from the Perak Abayis Veliyah, which is the good segue from Bava Metzia into Bava Basra, and that is if I live on the top floor and you live on the bottom floor, and my floor, its watertight seal is broken, and I wash my hands in a certain place in my second floor, and the water runs right down and damages the circuit board of your fridge or of your new oven, we don't say al nizik lahachazatzma, because that's giri today. That's coming directly from me. That's more like odem amazik, and there even Rabbi Yosy would agree that the al amazik lahachazatzma. Zok Gemara, Papi, you know. His name was Papi, you know, because he came from the city of Yunah. It's like the name Oberlander. Why did you call it Oberlander? It comes from Oberland, right? So his name was Papi, you know. Only he started off poor, Behesher Hava, and then he became wealthy. He became successful. He bought a whole load of Nvidia, and boom, now he became rich. He was a regular schnorr, and he became rich. Or maybe it was Apple. I'm not sure which one it was, but whatever it was, he did good. He did well. So what did he do? What do you do when you suddenly become a millionaire overnight? Vanapadna, he built a beautiful house. He must have lived in Toronto. Or Lakewood, that's right. Havahanach Atzuri B'Shevavuse. There was a nearby sesame seed press, and the press had a vibration. It vibrated the land around. The Chiyav Daike Shumshami, whenever they would operate this press, have a Naida Apadne. The walls of his new mansion that he's so proud of started to vibrate. Now he's concerned that you're going to damage my whole building. Clearly, this was not in Los Angeles because people they don't even give a second thought to a vibrating floor. Also, Rabashi, so he went to Rabashi to take him to the Torah. Amalei, so Rabashi said, "Ki haven be'Rav Kahana." When I was by Rav Kahana, havar minan might Rabbi Yosy begir delay. Normally, Mr. Sesame Seed, you would be in the right. But here you're directly damaging. Your vibration is directly damaging his house. Here there's a good argument to make that even Rabbi Yosy would agree because it's giri delay. It's alamazik lahachastat. The kama. So how do you assess, is this vibration bad enough that we can call it giri delay? Zokt the Gemara, Kidenayid Nachtama Apumidachat. Rashi learns what it means is if you have a jug on top of a wall, let's say you had a jug on top of the wall of the house, and it's shaking that much that the lid on the jug would fall off. That's the litmus test, very scientific litmus test, how you could tell if it's too much vibration. Tosfos didn't like that because Tosfos asks a very practical kasha. Tosfos asks, if it's shaking that much that the jug on top of the wall is shaking that much that its lid falls off, that building is about to collapse. Its mashma is a pretty strong building. On a strong building, even this vibration, it wouldn't cause a jug on top of a wall to shake so much that the lid should fall off. The chad naid means if you're holding the kad in your hand and you're walking nearby, you'll feel the vibration. That takes much less vibration to cause it to fall off. Okay? However, the Ritzbah has an engineering dispute with the structural engineering dispute, because he holds it's not so fair to say the Bedavar Muad misnaded hanechtama to Davar Kal, Aval Pisha Padna Ein misnaded. Even though the padna is not shaking that much, it's a strong building, nevertheless, it will move a little bit, and that small movement will cause a much greater movement on top of the jug. You can test this at home, but try to use something unbreakable. Zok the Gemara weiter. The Vei Bar Miriam. So I don't know how to archetype it. I would touch it as the household of Bar Merion. Varei de Ravin, who was the son of Ravin. So Merion was the son of Ravin, and we're talking about his household. Yeah. Okay. Kihava nafti kisna. Whenever they would process their flax, so they would bang it with a paddle to get all the psoilus out of it. So naturally, a whole cloud of smoke would be released from this pishton and be carried by the wind wherever it would land. Wouldn't appreciate this cloud of dust. Have Oslo Raksa, this cloud of dust would go umaska inchi and was damaging people. So dust. What's shaking out of the what's coming out of the vision.
The way to make piston, first you
spread it out on a rack and you bang it.
First you soak it, and then it becomes you pick it up, and then you bang it so the fibers come out. So
remember, we once learned that it was Shabbos if it's a kablin or if it's a Poel Yoim, and the Gemara ended up saying that you ended up paying a guy per club. Remember the Gemara said you pay a guy per club.
What happens is
so I'm referring to it as dust, but yeah, it's soil. That's right. Whatever, it's going to go somewhere and damage. So also lakamei to Ravina. So they came to Ravina to complain, tell these guys to stop. They're a public menace. Amalahu. So he told them, yes, Rabbi Yosy, even Rabbi Yosy agrees that by gira delay, when it's a direct damage, there you could stop and you could say the mazik has to be marked. But this is not that. If the zets that you give the pishton create such a inertia that forces these psoilus to go all the way to where they're causing damage, that would be gear delay. But here, hachazikahu the kamamtala. Sure, the zets makes it airborne, but at the end of the day, the wind current is what brings it over to you. That's not directly gear delay. So therefore, we don't have the grounds with which to stop these pishton processors. Matzkavlo Mar Baravashi. Mar Baravashi objected to the psak of Ravina. And he asked, Maishna Mizoira Baruch Yosy. If you on Shabbos, not you, Chas v'shalom, if someone on Shabbos takes a pitchfork and throws the grain up into the wind, and now the wind blows away the psoilus, so that's a malacha, that's a joint venture between you and the wind. You didn't do the whole thing by yourself. Yet the halacha is someone's going to be chayav achatas if he does that b'shogi. Somebody will be chayav skil if he does that b'mezid. It's a malacha Shabbos. So you see the fact that the wind is playing a role in my activity doesn't take away the fact that it's gira deli. So if you're chayav for Shabbos, why wouldn't you be chayav for Mazah? Amrua kamei de Meremar. They said this over to Meremar. Amalu. In fact, I disagree with Ravina, and I hold that this is considered gira delay, and you could stop these people from processing their pishton. Ravina clearly argued, as Rashi says, because the kasavar mamayna me Isra Shabbos lo yafinon. You can't bring a raya from moment to Isra Shabbos. Could be Isra Shabbos, you're over, but you're not over moment. It's not directly gira delay. Maybe your level of involvement is enough to pass the threshold to be mechayiv for Shabbos, but not necessarily to be mechayiv you for nezikin. So Dr. Ravina, even according to Ravina, who holds that you cannot compare it to Shabbos, but let's look at another similar case of nezikin. Ma'ishna migates a spark a yotzim mitachas apatish. You have a blacksmith, and as he's working, a spark leaves his work and it flies over and it lights something on fire. What is halacha? V'hizik chayiv l'shalom. So there too, what's carrying the spark? The wind. So you see the fact that he caused a spark that's now being carried by the wind will be enough to be mechayiv him. Why should that be different than this fellow to pishtan? So there's a very big difference. Hasam nichel edelezel. When he's hitting it, he has intention that the wind should take the spark away. You know why? Let your house get on fire. I don't want the spark landing in my house. So he's doing it with the intention to make the spark go away. But I'm just trying to get the psoilus out of my pishtan. I don't care if it lands right here. So what I'm doing is not with the intent to make it travel further. Therefore, it's not considered gira delay. Therefore, Ravina said, I'm sorry, I don't have grounds with which to stop these people from processing the pishtan. Zok to Gemara weiter. If we have time, there's a very important Tosis. I'll just look at the Kash of Tosis. Zika hu de kamamtila. Frek Tosis, the obvious question. Kashalari, the lachai mishamesh. If you put this menace into the atmosphere, and now this menace is floating along, and potentially going to cause damage to somebody else, why isn't that not H? And don't tell me that H is only literally fire, because we have examples of H that's not real fire. Where do you see that? Midi dahava avnoi, bizakinoi, umasoi. The halacha is if you have these items, shanichem b'rosh gago, and you left them unprotected on your roof, v'naflu b'ruach matzuya v'zikai, and they fell off b'ruach matzuya, the damage, the chayev mishamesh. So why is this no different? You created a menace that the wind now carried. Why would you not be chayev al teish? And therefore, why is Ravina letting him get away with it? In our case, for sure, it's a ruach matzuya midaparchala, because the Gemara asked from Zoyer of Ruach Messiah. Zoyer of Ruach Messiah is clearly speaking by a ruach matzuya kedamash mabakon. That's a very important kasha that Tosh was asked, which he elaborates on. But let's go weiter. But it's important that we realize that this is involved with that. Okay, Zok the Gemara. Lo yita adam ilan samuch l'sada. A person should not plant an ilan near a field, near a friend's field, l'sada chaveroi. Elam kein hirchak mimenu arba amos. You have to be 4 amos away. What type of field are we talking about, Zok Rashi? Bein tzad alavon. Say if it's a wheat field. Bein tzad ilan. Say if it's a property where trees are planted. What is the reasoning for this 4 amos? The time of kedei avodas haker. You need to leave enough room to work around a kerem. It doesn't have to necessarily be a kerem. Any type of tree, you're going to bring a certain rig to aerate the soil around the tree, and that rig is 4 amos wide. And therefore, we want to make sure that lo yehei tzarech lahachnis machrishosoi l'chseich steichaveroi. We want to make sure that your trees are far enough from your friend's property so that there's no chance that your rig is going to infringe on this property. It doesn't make a difference what type of trees are growing there. This applies equally to gefanim or any tree, because it's not about climb that we're talking, it's about your rig infringing on his property. But what if you had a wall? Then there's no issue, because you're not going to be able to infringe on his property because your rig won't fit there, because the wall would not let it go there. We had all of these halachas we had already. What if the roots of my tree that's too close to the border are, let's stop a second. We had this Gemara we had this Mishnah quoted a little bit earlier. The Gemara asked, how does that help together? The roots are growing below the ground and they're going to damage each other. So the Gemara answered, it's speaking where you have, I forgot the word for it, where you have the stones that are below ground level that doesn't let the roots cross the border either. You remember what that was called? There was a word for it. The below grade stones that didn't let that. I'm sorry? I forgot the Lashon Gemara of what I was referring to. But it's talking about there's not only protection above ground, but there's protection below ground as well. Because at the end of the day, 4 amos on top is needed, so your rig could be there. But we still have the rule that you got to be 25 amos away. But for that, you have the below grade barrier. Now the Mishnah goes on and says, so the Gemara asked there, how could you have shurashim yoytzim if we just said we're talking about a wall that's lower, that's below ground as well? So for that, Gemara says that the Mishnah means, what if you didn't have that wall below grade? And because of that, your tree started infringing on your neighbor's property because your roots were going there? The halacha is, now your friend wants to be able to plow anywhere in his property. There's big roots in the way that'll mess up his plow blade. So the halacha is, he's allowed to dig out 3 tvachim and he's allowed to cut out any of your roots that are within 3 tvachim of the surface, because his plow blade penetrates the ground by 3 tvachim. So in order so that your roots shouldn't prevent him from plowing, he's allowed to cut out any of the roots of your tree that are within 3 tvachim of the surface. What if he wasn't plowing there? He wanted to dig a bore, which is a lot more of a depth than merely 3 tvachim. Then he gets to dig out whatever he wants, and any roots that are in his way, he can chop them right out. Your etim shaloi, and the etim belong to him. And Rashi says you'll have to wait to the Gemara to find out who the shaloi is, who gets to keep the wood. Tana. We just said there's a shear of 4 amos that you have to stay away from the edge of the property to prevent infringement due to your rig. Only in Eretz Yisrael do you need to maintain 4 amos from the edge of your property. In Bavel, you only need 2 amos because in Bavel they had thinner rigs. They had rigs that were built with a narrower footprint. Tanya Namihachi, Lo Yita Adam, Elon, Somech L'stei Chaveiroi, El Emkein, Hirchak Mimenu, Shtei Amos. Fragt the Gemara, what do you mean 2 amos? We are not Arba Amos. The Lav Kishmul Shmamina, Kiddush Shmul Shmamina, we have a right to Shmul. There's another version of how this conversation happened. It presents exactly the same information, but in a different order. Here we started off by Shmuel making a statement, and then us bringing a raya from the steer and Mishnayos, from the Mishnah to the Brisa, to prove Shmuel's point. But there are those who start off with the kasha, and to forever the kasha, it led to Shmuel's chiddush. Vika de Rami lo mirma. Tanan milot le'it ad milot so lechaver elom kenechak min 4 amos v'tani 2 amos. Amar Shmuel lekasha kan de Bavel kan be'eretz Yisrael. Okay, Gavalti. Zog the Gemara. Rava bar Rav Chanan havelei hanu dikli a mitzra the pardisa de Yosy. He had these palm trees that were right up against the edge of Rabbi Yosef's pardes. We already know Rabbi Yosef was very particular about people who did things near his property. Remember, he was upset at the people who were doing the kosas dam near his property because the ravens came and ate the blood and then messed up his dates. And he said that for me, this is like a basic kisa, even though normally you wouldn't have to be so far away, but for me, this is like a basic kisa. It bothers me very much. So he had some other neighbors, and he had a neighbor by the name of Rabbi Bar of Chanan who had the column by his partners. Okay, have also tzipari Yosy ridiculous. They were birds that would come and sit in the trees of his neighbor, and then then they would come land after they had their anchor point, their rest area in the trees of his neighbor. They came and landed in the field of Mafshadlai, and they messed up this field. They were eating the seeds, whatever it was messing them up. Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef told his neighbor, Zilkoitz, go cut your tree down. Amalei, so his neighbor said, I maintain the distances mandated by the halacha. I'm 4 amos away from the border. Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef said, you're making a mistake. If you have trees, that's enough to be 4 amos away. But we're talking about a vineyard, but inon tfei. You need to have much, much more space, and therefore your achaka of 4 amos was inadequate. Frek the Gemara, we are non-tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, it says beferish in our Mishnah, echad gefanim, ve'echad kalilon, 4 amos is enough. But non-tanan echad gefanim, ve'echad kalilon. So how could you tell me I need to maintain a greater distance than 4? The Mishnah says not like your Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, no. You didn't learn the Mishnah right. If both people on either side of the border are planting the same type, there are even gefanim, 4 amos will be enough. If you have trees and I have a vineyard, but you don't say there you need to be further away.
Why? Because like great.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure for the reason. I'm not sure the reason. I'm not sure. I don't know. But who kishanada the column. Oh, so Tosfos makes a very important point here. That's only if it's kishanada the column kshem kvoyim. There would have been a problem if you planted mature, fully grown decollum right on your side of the border from my gefadim. Avalam not a garden. What if you just planted a seed that over many years grew into a big tree? Loy hoyel loy loy. The memela kagodal will loy gear delay. It's not gear delay. It's only gear delay if I'm putting a menace right there that's an active menace. If I put something that will grow into a menace, that's no longer gear delay. So we're all basing this on Rabbi Yosef Shita, that unless it's gear delay. So the whole discussion here is this gear delay? It's only gear delay if you put up a whole tree. So it doesn't answer your question as to why. What does he say?
This is by Kafanim, so you just have to keep the space to get the plow through.
Right.
And same with Ilanos. But when you have Ilanos and Kafanim, so then you have the tree, then you have the bird problem. Right.
So from Kafanim, you wouldn't have a bird problem.
Right.
Because why would they come to mind?
Right, they rest
wherever they land, they'll stay there.
They go into trees, right? So if it's trees and trees, you don't have a problem.
The grass is green on the other side, but if it's the same grass, it won't be greener on the other side. So the birds will stay where they are. Okay, Gavaltim. So Zok to Gemara, Amalei, the neighbor told Rabbi Yosef, "You are out of luck. I'm no like Hayatna. I refuse to cut down my tree." The Amarab, because Rav told us, Hi Dikla, the Toyin Kaba, if you have a tree that has at least one cup of pears, meaning it's really an elon that's producing pears, you're not allowed to cut it down. So I will not cut it down. Chanina said, my son, my dear son, whose name was Shikhas, he must have been forgetful. Maybe he was like one of the dwarfs, forgetful. Is there such a dwarf that's called forgetful? No. So he died. Why? I cut down a date tree, a fig tree. Tain is a fig tree before the time, meaning eventually it doesn't produce pears anymore. I cut it down before, and because of that, my son died. There's no way I'm playing with fire. Rav Huna, it was Rav Huna who's the neighbor of Yosef. Rabba Bar Chanan said, "There's no way I'm playing with fire. I'm not cutting any tree down." Mar, you Rabbi Yosef, if you want to cut it down, you do that. Risk your children's life. I'm not going to risk my children's life. Rav Papa, Havlahana a mitzvah Rav Huna Barej Rav Yeshua. Rav Papa had the column that was right on the edge of the field of Rav Huna Barej Rav Yeshua. Again, probably he had been the promise. Yes.
Yosy.
Yes.
When he told him you risk your children's life, that's not what he was telling him, but you can't tell him that. He was telling him that if you hold that it's taka damage to the tree, to the field, then you are allowed to cut it down.
I hear.
And he wouldn't tell him to go kill your own kid. He wouldn't tell him that.
Quoting? Are you quoting that from somebody?
I'm quoting it from Rabbeinu Yoina and Tosfos.
Okay. So
I think it's the last Tosfos on the page. He talks about it.
I know like Yatna. Okay, let's see Tosfos. So I thank you for bringing that up. Vim Taimar, but now but the kaitis for nice and dumb. The Mishnah is allowed to do it. Maybe our Mishnah is speaking when there's no pears. There was a decal that was weakening the nearby geffen. The Gomer lemacher isi li mikurayu. I'm going to bring its root, meaning I'm going to cut it down. Alma mishum hezek fanim mutalok it to color. Yes, lefarish the shiny awesome sheyoyser midai hayu makishim b'kfanim. They were causing a lot of damage. I'd have a tambu time with the cham. So Tosfos here is just saying that everybody agrees that if it's causing such a high level of damage that you taste the wine in the dates, meaning it's sucking so much nourishment away from the wine, away from the vines, that's a real damage. There, everybody agrees you can cut it down. So I guess based on that, maybe that's what the shaila was. Is it causing enough damage that you can cut it down or not? I hear. Okay, Gavalt. Rav Papa, Hanu Ditli, Amitra, Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua, also Ashkei Dav Chafar. So Rav Papa had the column near the border of Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua, and he saw Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua was digging out a bar and chopping the roots of his tree. Also Ashkei Dav Chafar, the Kakoi Trasha. You're cutting now. Papa saw that his neighbor is cutting the roots of his tree. Amalei, my high, what are you doing? What are you doing, Rashi? On my kiyatsta. Why would you be cutting the roots of my tree? Amalei, what do you mean? Why I'm cutting your tree? To before Shemish, Tanan. Oh, you shroshim yotzim l'soich shachavei, right? Mamik shloisha. I'm allowed to dig out and destroy any roots that are within 3 tvachim of the surface, kedei shelo ya'akav v'machreisha, so that when I plow, I won't be banging into your roots. Amalei, hanamili shloisha. Okay, so if you were digging 3 tvachim and chopping out my roots that were within 3 tvachim of the surface, I wouldn't say anything. But marka chaver tfei, you're digging much deeper than 3 tvachim. Amalei, ana boyer shichan u'ma'aris kachavan. I'm building boyers shichan u'ma'aris. And the Mishnah says as well that now that you could cut as much as you want. And he gets to keep the eitzim. Rashi told us that we're going to soon see who gets to keep the eitzim. I'm not sure if in this case Rav Huna kept the eitzim or not. Amar Papa, Amar Likula v'Yachile. I tried to bring him a million different rayas why he shouldn't cut it down. But he didn't accept any of those rayas. He was still cutting my roots. I couldn't stop him from cutting my roots. Ad the Amalei, until I told him this, and then I'm going to need help here in a minute. Ad the Amalei, the Amar of Yehuda, Meitar shechziku by Rabim also lekalkulate. I had this tree there for a long time, and there's a chazak on it already, so you shouldn't have a right to cut it. Zok Rashi, shechziku by Rabim, la soisel on derech. People used to pass through the property all the time. Also, you're not allowed to break it up. Even though that path happens to belong to Yochid. But I already had a chazaka. I had my trees here for a while. Now you want to wake up and tell me that you want to cut it down? I'm sorry. Now, this is where I don't understand. Levasa de Nafa. So Rashi says, Levasa, after a papa left. After a papa left, Amar, he said, who said? Rashi Rav Huna said. But who did Rav Huna say it to? Nobody was around. And what did he say? Amayla Amla, why didn't you tell our papa a better time? Why you should be able to keep cutting the roots? Kan b'soich shish esr yama, kan chutz l'shish esr yama. So the time I understand very well. Rashi explains it very clearly. Even though you have to be 25 amas away from your neighbor's property, but there's a difference of within 16 and further away than 16. And look at Rashi. You know when you have a chazaka up to 16 amis around the ilah. Even if you claim Rav Papa that you have a chazaka to keep that ilah there, that's only if it was within 16 feet of my property. You know why? If you're more than 16 amis away, but you're not 25 amis away, you can't say I have a chazaka to have my tree there and it's sticking into your property even up to the 25 mark. That's not a chazaka because there's no reason for me to ever object to it. It's only a chazaka if there's a reason for me to object. Why wouldn't I object? Even though the shroshim of a tree will spread out chafayama, they're not sucking nourishment away from my property. But no, I'm only cutting what's further than 16 amas. On that you don't have chazak. Because I had no reason to object. So that's a good time. But what I don't understand is here you had an argument here between Rav Huna and Rav Papa. So it says after Rav Papa left, Rav Huna said to somebody else, you should have answered. If anything, somebody else had told Rav Huna, you should have answered. He said to himself, why didn't I think of that time? I should have said that time. Oh, so he's talking to himself. Okay. Why didn't I have a better time? I could have told him that you don't have a chazak. Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out. I couldn't figure out who's he talking to. I didn't have that he talked to himself. Okay. Okay, here I need help. I didn't have a chance to prepare this. So let's see what happened. Boy Minei Yaakov Hadaiva, Rashi says he was from the city of Hadaiv, Merav Chista. Eitim, show me who gets these roots that the neighbor is cutting out. We learned it in the price. Shrosha Elon shall hedgit. Haboin b'shal hektar. You had Shrosha Elon of hedgit, but they were growing into Hekdish's property. Loy nehenin, v'loy ma'alim. Loy nehenin midrabanan. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to have hanoah from those roots, even though technically they belong to a yachid. But loy ma'alim, im nehen loy ma'al. If you had enough from them, you won't be moil, meaning they're not hektish. So Zok to Gemara. If you say that those roots belong to the owner of the tree, which is a yachid, not of hektish, that makes perfect sense why there's no din meila. If you say that who gets to keep the roots, the person in the karka who's allowed to dig it out, well, that means these roots should belong to hektish. There should be a din meila because these roots belong to hektish. So you have a raya basar ilan nazlinan. Elamizak gemara basar ilan nazlinan. So you're going to conclude that the tree, the owner of the tree owns those roots, and that's why there's no meila. Let's look at the seifa of that brayso. Shall hektish haboy mishal hedjit. What if you had a tree that was on hektish's side and its roots grew into someone else's private property? Again, it has the same halach. If you go back to the Elam, these roots belong to hektish. Amai loy mal. Zok to Gemara, midei area begidulin haba, midei area begidulin haba in la'achem ikanaskina. Zok Rashi, maskana the kosher is still part of the kasher. Claimer mikula lav iryahi, and I'm sure the Dallas will say it's not a raya, lav raya. Mikula lav rayahi. Zok to Gemara. Loy lemishma mina basar ilan, loy lemishma mina basar karka. You can't bring any raya from this case of hektish. The time of mishum, the hanich shroshim gidulim haboyim la'achash hukna she'ilanu. We're talking about roots that grew after this already became hektish. What impact does that have? The ikalam the amr b'mesachas me'ilah ein mo'alim begidulin. You're not allowed to be moil in gidulei hektish. Afilu shroshay hektish v'stei hektish. There's no din meila. There's no din meila. So therefore, Zok Tamar area you don't have a raya. If it's speaking begidul haba me'achach eskinan v'kasavar, and this price holds ein meila begidulin. So therefore, the reason why you're not moil on the roots of a hektish tree that grew into the Rishus HaYochid, why aren't you moil? Either you belong to hektish, true they belong to hektish, but there's no din meila from something that grew out of hektish, and therefore there's no din meila, but it's still also to take hanol from. Ravina Amar loy kasha. You don't know the kasha. Kan besoich sheish eshrayama. Kan chutz besoich eshrayama. Dr. Rashi, what does that mean? Ravina Amar loy kasha. Reisha the katani basar ilan is linan. The reisha that says you go basar ilan, where the tree was in the rishus of the yachid. There's no din meila on it because it belongs to the owner of the tree. Any roots cut out, the toich tezayin belong to the owner of the tree. The sefer the katani shall hektish. Boyin b'soshal hedjit, the sefer was speaking where the tree was on Hektish's side, and the grew into the hedjit. There, you know why there's no din meila? Loy ma'alan hainu chutz v'tazai. Okay, that's a little bit of a doichik because nowhere in the brisa does it identify that we're changing the distance from the tree that you found the roots. But Ravina wants to make that distinction. At the end of the day, you don't have a raya from this brisa who the roots belong to.
Because if it's after 16, it doesn't suck.
But how does that change who the wood belongs to? But that's what she does. Amar Ula, Ilan asamuch lemeitzar, an Ilan that's right near the meitzar. Okay, b'soich sheish esrei amma, if it's within 16 amas, gadlnu. Rashi says why? Sheyonik mistei chaveira. You're sucking nourishment out of the property of your friend. Gadlnu, and therefore ve'ein meviin mimenu bikurim. There's no chiyuv to take bikurim from this tree, and this nourished from non-artzacha. Zok Gemara, where did Ula get this chiddush? If it's from the following mission, if you have 10 netiyos that are spread out in the beisah, which is shalav klayim, Chorshin called beisah b'shvilan. You have to uproot the whole beisah. You have to plow it out and destroy any plant in there. Zok Rashi, Esher netiyos mefuzaros b'beisah, la'orchel l'rachvoi kulam b'shavah. So they're equally spaced in this Beisa. Yoin Kais Mikol Beisa, the Chulam Charklem. Each one needs the whole Beisa. And there, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. It's nothing to do with Klein. I totally messed up. Shalav Shemitah. Umutu Lacharshai Erev Shvi is Ad Rosh Hashanah. You're allowed to service this property even right before Shvius up until Rosh Hashanah. Sha'alacha l'Moshe Messinai. Which halacha l'Moshe Messinai that you're allowed to service these. Uveisa chamishim amal chamishim amal. How big is a beisa? It's 50 amos by 50 amos. Where do you get that from? Chatzar Mishkan kol beis osayim. The Chatzar Mishkan was considered to be a beis osayim, 2 saws. That was 50 by 100. But Me'al chamishim, the beisa is 50 by 50. As in the Tiyas of Bazars, Sech beisa. Charshin kol beisa b'shvilon. Why? Because you don't say just plow and aerate right around those plants. If it's spread out in this concentration, the whole beisa has to be plowed to properly aerate the soil to service these royim. Ad Rosh Hashanah. So kol beisa b'shvilon ad Rosh Hashanah. Kama havalu. How many are there? So kama havalu beisa ki avdus l'ritzua shel amaroichet. If you want to split it into strips of 1 amma, so trey alfin v'chamesh mea garmide v'chol chad v'chad. You know, this is getting complicated. I think I'm going to abort, and Mitchell will pick up from here tomorrow, and we will. I'm sorry. It's a geometrical cheshbon. It's going to get complicated, so I'd rather have it have clarity on it. So it'll go to Shemir tomorrow. Okay, we should have a wonderful gebenchte day. Today is the Ar Chaim HaKudosh is your side. I don't know what that is. So should we zeichen to Yoshi's